"What are you doing at my son's grave?" the billionaire asked the weeping waitress holding a child. Her answer breaks him. The cemetery was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that makes you notice the wind moving through the trees. Emma stood before a simple headstone, her arms wrapped around a little boy who pressed his face into her shoulder. She wasn't supposed to be there. She knew that, but some promises are bigger than fear. She knelt down, her waitress uniform still smelling faintly of coffee and maple syrup from the morning shift, and placed a single white rose on the grass. The boy in her arms, barely 3 years old, reached out his small hand and touched the cold stone. "Mama," he whispered, "is this where my daddy sleeps?" Emma's throat tightened. Before she could answer, she heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, heavy with grief. "What are you doing at my son's grave?" She turned, and her heart stopped. Asterisk, where are you watching from tonight? Asterisk. Emma had been working at Rosie's Diner for nearly 4 years now. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always hot, the regulars knew your name, and the tips were just enough to keep the lights on. She'd learned to smile through the exhaustion, to carry plates with grace even when her feet ached, to listen to strangers' stories like they were the most important things in the world. Because sometimes they were. Most mornings began the same way. She'd tie her apron, tuck her hair behind her ears, and greet Mr. Calloway, who always ordered 2 eggs over easy and told the same joke about his late wife. She'd refill Mrs. Jensen's tea without asking and slip an extra cookie onto little Benny's plate when his mother wasn't looking. It was a small life, a quiet one, but it was hers, except for the part that wasn't. 3 years ago, Emma had met a man named Daniel. He'd come into the diner late one night, soaked from the rain, looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with directions. They talked until closing. Then the next night, and the night after that, he never told her much about his family, just that they were complicated, wealthy, that he'd walked away from all of it because he wanted to live a life that felt real. She'd fallen in love with him, quietly, completely, and then, 6 months later, she'd found out she was pregnant. Daniel had held her that night, his hands trembling, his eyes full of something she couldn't name. "I'll take care of you," he'd promised. "Both of you. I swear." But 2 weeks before their son was born, Daniel was gone. A car accident on a rainy highway. No warning. No goodbye. Emma had named the baby after him. Little Daniel. Danny. For 3 years, she'd raised him alone. She worked double shifts, sang him to sleep, taught him to say please and thank you. She never told anyone about his father's family. She didn't even know if they knew Danny existed. But every year, on the anniversary of Daniel's death, she took Danny to the cemetery. She wanted him to know that his father had been real, that he'd been loved. She just never expected anyone else to be there, especially not the man standing behind her now, dressed in a tailored black coat, his face carved with years of sorrow. The man stared at her, his gray eyes moving from her face to the child in her arms. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and strained. "What are you doing here?" Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She recognized him, not from meeting him. Daniel had never introduced her to his family, but from the few photographs Daniel had kept hidden in his wallet. This was his father, the billionaire, the man Daniel had walked away from. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to intrude. She looked down at Danny, who was staring up at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. "I wanted him to know his father." The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze, something sharp and painful. "His father," he repeated, almost to himself. Emma nodded. She felt tears rising but forced them down. "Daniel, your son. He was Danny's father." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, slowly, the man took a step closer. His hands were shaking. He stared at Danny as if he was seeing a ghost. "Daniel never told me," he whispered. "He never said he had a child." "He didn't know at first," Emma said softly. "And when he found out, he was so happy. He wanted to tell you. He really did. But he was scared. He thought you'd try to take Danny away from me. That you'd think I wasn't good enough." The man's jaw tightened. He looked away, blinking hard. "I wouldn't have," he said hoarsely. "I would have—" He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter now. But it did matter. Emma could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Danny wriggled in her arms, reaching out toward the man. "Are you my grandpa?" he asked, his voice bright and innocent. The man froze. Emma's breath caught. And then something broke inside him. His face crumpled, and he sank to his knees in front of the grave, his hand covering his mouth as silent sobs shook his frame. Asterisk if this moment touched your heart. Please give the video a thumbs up. Asterisk. Emma knelt beside him, not knowing what else to do. For a long time, the man didn't speak. He just knelt there, his hand pressed against a headstone, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Emma stayed beside him, one arm still around Danny, the other resting gently on her own knee. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if there were words for this kind of grief. Finally, he looked up at her. His eyes were red, but there was something soft in them now, something human. "I lost him," he said quietly. "I lost my son because I was too proud, too stubborn. He wanted to live his own life, and I told him he was throwing everything away." His voice cracked. "The last thing I said to him was that he'd regret it, that he'd come crawling back." Emma's chest ached. "He never regretted it," she said gently. "He talked about you sometimes. He missed you. But he was happy. He really was." The man closed his eyes. "And now I'll never get to tell him I was wrong." Danny, sensing the sadness, reached out and touched the man's hand. "Don't be sad, Grandpa," he said softly. "Daddy's not really gone. Mama says he's in the stars." The man looked at the boy, really looked at him, and something in his expression shifted. Emma saw it happen. The walls coming down. The grief making space for something else. "He has his eyes," the man whispered. "Daniel's eyes." Emma nodded, and his smile, and his laugh. The man's hand trembled as he reached out, hesitating just before touching Danny's cheek. "May I?" "Of course," Emma said. He brushed his fingers against Danny's soft skin, and the boy giggled. "You're silly, Grandpa." The man let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He looked at Emma, and for the first time, there was no anger, no suspicion, just a father who had lost everything and found something he didn't know he'd been searching for. "I don't even know your name," he said. "Emma," she said. "Emma Hart." He nodded slowly. "I'm Richard. Richard Colburn." Asterisk, have you ever faced something like this? Share your story in the comments. Asterisk. He looked back at the grave, then at Danny, then at Emma. "I can't bring him back," he said quietly, "but I can do right by his son, if you'll let me." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel so alone. Over the following weeks, Richard Colburn became a presence in their lives. Not an overwhelming one. He was careful, respectful, always asking before showing up. He'd visit the diner sometimes, sitting in the corner booth with a newspaper he never read, just watching Emma work and waiting to walk her and Danny home. At first, Emma wasn't sure what to make of it. She'd spent so long expecting nothing from anyone that kindness felt strange. But Richard wasn't trying to take over. He was trying to learn, to understand the life his son had chosen, to know the woman Daniel had loved. One evening, after her shift, Richard offered to take them to dinner. Not somewhere fancy. Emma had made it clear she wasn't comfortable with that. Just a small Italian place down the street where Danny could get spaghetti and make a mess without anyone caring. Danny chatted the whole time, telling Richard about his favorite cartoons and the frog he'd seen at the park. Richard listened to every word. His expression softened a way Emma suspected it hadn't been in years. "He's a bright boy," Richard said quietly, watching Danny color on the paper placemat. "He is," Emma agreed. "He asks a million questions a day." Richard smiled faintly. Daniel was like that too. Drove his mother crazy. His smile faded. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. "I'm sorry," Emma said. "She would have loved him," Richard said, nodding toward Danny. "She would have loved you too." Emma's throat tightened. Daniel said she was kind. "She was," Richard said, "kinder than I deserved." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I don't want you to take this the wrong way," he said carefully, But I know what it's like to work 2 jobs and still barely get by. Daniel told me once. He was proud of you for it. Said you were the strongest person he'd ever met. Emma's eyes stung. She looked down at the envelope but didn't take it. I'm not trying to buy my way into your life, Richard said quietly. I just want to help. The way I should have helped my son. Emma's hands shook. She thought about the overdue rent notice sitting on her kitchen table, the electricity bill, Danny's shoes that were getting too small. Asterisk if you've been enjoying this story. Subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Asterisk. She looked at Richard, and she saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't about money. It was about love, about making up for lost time. Slowly, she took the envelope. Thank you, she whispered. Months passed. The seasons changed. And so did everything else. Richard didn't just help with bills. He became family. He showed up for Danny's 4th birthday with a cake he'd baked himself, lopsided and a little burnt, but made with so much love that Emma cried. He taught Danny how to fly a kite in the park. He sat with Emma on her days off and listened to her talk about her dreams of maybe, someday, going back to school. You should, he said one afternoon. I'll help, whatever you need. Emma had laughed, shaking her head. I'm a waitress. Richard, I'm not. You're Daniel's choice, he interrupted gently. And that means you're extraordinary. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled. One evening, as winter turned to spring, the 3 of them returned to the cemetery. It had become a tradition now, something they did together. Emma brought flowers. Richard brought his son's favorite book, and Danny brought a drawing he'd made at preschool. Look, Daddy, Danny said, pressing the drawing against the headstone. I drew you and Mama and Grandpa. We're all holding hands. Emma's heart swelled. She glanced at Richard, who was blinking rapidly, his hand resting on the stone. He would have been so proud of you, Richard said softly, his voice thick. Both of you. Emma reached out and took his hand. He squeezed it, and for a moment they just stood there, 3 people bound by love and loss and quiet, enduring hope that broken things could be made whole again. As they walked back to the car, Danny skipped ahead, humming a song he'd learned at school. Richard watched him with a smile that looked almost peaceful. Thank you, he said quietly, glancing at Emma. For what? For letting me in. For giving me a second chance. He paused. For giving me my son back, in the only way I can still have him. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, healing tears. Thank you, she said, for seeing us, for loving him. Richard nodded, and as they drove home together, the evening light golden and soft, Emma realized something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone anymore. Neither was Danny, and neither was Richard. They were a family, unexpected, imperfect, but real, and that was enough. Asterisk if you enjoyed this story. Please share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Asterisk.